Hello to everyone and to the internet. It is currently Monday, February 18th. How y'all doing? This is the Young Globalist, and this is the news in 2019. Alright everybody, in United States news, Nanci Pelosi wants your guns to get back at Trump. Typical childish Democrat, you know what I mean? It's like, that whole Mueller probe was created in spite of Trump. Everything they do is in spite of Trump. They hate Trump. It's very childish and ridiculous the way they act. And her bottom line is, if Trump declares a national emergency at the southern border, then she'll declare a nationwide gun ban. Or rather, she'll say that a Democratic president could issue a national emergency of their own. Or could they? Bottom line is, she goes through with it, people will just hide their guns, you know? Just throw them in some bushes or put them somewhere where they don't know, and then they can get it back later. They might even straight up fight back. And that would be very tyrannical of them to do. They just simply cannot do it. And I'll get to that in a minute, but let me finish her statement, which it is as follows. The precedent that the president is setting here is something that should be met with great unease and dismay by the Republicans, Pelosi warned Thursday at a press conference. If the president can declare an emergency on something that he has created as an emergency, and on the illusion that he wants to convey, just think of what a president with different values can present to the American people. You want to talk about a national emergency? Let's talk about today, the 1-year anniversary of another manifestation of the epidemic of gun violence in America. She continued, "That's a national emergency. Why did you declare that emergency, Mr. President? I wish you would. But a Democratic president can do that. A Democratic president can declare emergencies as well." Infowars.com reports many mainstream media outlets, including the New York Times, advocated repealing the Second Amendment in the wake of the Parkland, Florida shooting that killed 17 people. Yeah, actually, the funny thing is, a Democratic president legally could not declare a state of emergency over a gun ban. And the simple reason is this. The Second Amendment, which clearly states, and I quote, "A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." In short, by the very constitution of this country, a nationwide gun ban is illegal. Whereas building a wall is perfectly legal. There is a huge difference there. There they go again, trying to skirt the Constitution, trying to throw it away. It also says in the Constitution that if the government turns tyrannical, then the citizens have the legal right to overthrow it. And mind you, that's an amendment that hasn't been raped yet by these politicians. It's still a virgin, so to speak. And that's exactly what's going to happen if they actually go through with it. If they ever go through with that. You know that's exactly what's going to happen. We'll be going straight for them, with our targets aimed straight at their foreheads, right between the eyes. But of course they don't understand that, because they clearly don't understand the Constitution. That's why they're always trying to skirt it, or ignore it, or straight up just trying to throw it away. There's some kids playing in the other rooms, being noisy. So sorry you're going to have to put up with that. Bottom line is, she's wrong. A Democratic president absolutely could not. And it's not even the same thing. And as to it being an illusion, no. The crisis at the southern border is very real. But of course the Democrats are going to pretend it's not, because immigrants vote left. Ilhan Omar's city of Minneapolis has become the terrorist capital of America, according to the FBI. More men and boys from a Somali-American community in Minneapolis have joined or attempted to join terrorist organizations over the last 12 years than any other jurisdiction in the country. FoxNews.com reports the FBI stats show 45 Somalis left to join the ranks of either the Somali-based Islamic insurgency, Al-Shabaab, or the Iraq and Syria-based ISIS combined, and as of 2018, a dozen more had been arrested with the intention of leaving to support ISIS. Both numbers are for higher than those of alleged terrorist wannabes who left or attempted to leave the country from other areas in the country where Muslim refugees have been resettled. And it's not just the men and boys. A woman was arrested just last year and has been charged with providing material support to Al-Qaeda and arson. Yeah. Both an arsonist and providing soft support. Wonderful. So even the women are in on it. Now, I have to ask myself, and you should ask too, what is Ilhan Omar's role in this? Or at least what is her position on it? She hasn't said anything for or against. And since she's originally from Somalia as well, you would think she would be sympathetic to her fellow Muslims. Her role in this could be that, as a state representative, she could be the one, sort of turning a blind eye and just letting stuff happen, Be that deciding vote that prevents a bill getting passed that would put an end to their activities. She's their eyes and ears and support in the local Senate. I imagine that's probably what the role she would be serving. If she was for, if she is against, then how come she has not said anything? Why has she been quiet about it? What little she has said has just been has not been a straight up, she hasn't said anything that directly says, oh, these guys are bad. But federal authorities say they remain highly concerned about the terrorist connection with Minneapolis Somalis. Even though al-Shabaab is struggling against the Somali government and the so-called ISIS caliphate has crumbled under a sustained U.S.-led military campaign, we are very conscious that there may still be fertile ground for that, and that could restart at any time. One federal official told Fox News, based on historical experience, we had an upstick in 2007-2008 going for al-Shabaab, then a lull. Then as ISIS came back, we saw a whole bunch of people no longer headed for Somalia. They were headed for Iraq and Syria. That really caught us off guard. We didn't see that coming. It didn't make sense to us. We understood why kids were going back to Somalia, but going to Syria was another issue. A 100,000-member isolated Somali community in the state of Minnesota has been a prime recruitment center for acquiring new members of the terror groups. Investigators told Fox News that early on, al-Shabaab recruiting was almost exclusively word of mouth. One family connection to a contact of the terrorist group would be pulled in as a recruit, in a process that was repeated as the ranks of the al-Shabaab grew. But that change seemingly changed when ISIS came on the scene around 2014. Personal connections still played a part, but it became much more about digesting online recruitment videos and turning to alternative news sources, which played into violence being committed against Muslims around the world. Recruitment takes place online as well as face-to-face radicalization, sometimes with promises of what appears to be legitimate opportunities for al-Shabaab. They focus mainly on negative impact of U.S. counterterrorism policies, like targeted assassinations and drone strikes, and sometimes kill innocent civilians in Somalia. To attract recruits and sympathizers, explained David Otto, Director and Counterterrorism Program Coordinator at Global Risk International. They blame the failures of government on foreign intervention and link it to the reason why most Somalians have escaped home. The promise that al-Shabaab will restore a Sharia state and get rid of the government is somewhat attractive. Picture, if you will, you're a relatively peaceful Muslim, you've been relocated as a refugee to the United States, and you're slowly, with a great difficulty, but you're slowly learning to love America, learning to love its government. You're becoming an American, but you're not quite there yet. And then someone comes and tells you about the things that the government is doing to their people and how evil it all is. Ignoring the positive side of counterterrorism and focusing on the negative, purely on the negative. This anathemas you in your mind to the American government, everything it stands for. It becomes the enemy, it becomes the great Satan. And then the more time you spend with these terrorists, the more they radicalize you and, they draw you in. It's like a cult. And sometimes they don't have to say very much at all. These kind of ideologies, that's how I fell into the alt-right anti-SJW rabbit hole. They didn't have to say anything. They just had to display an attractive opinion. And that's how I got sucked, and I only recently got to crawl out of it. So I understand. perfectly how easy it is to fall down a particular rabbit hole when it's presented in a certain way that makes it seem very attractive and manipulative. It's incredible. And I imagine the alt-left works very much that same way. That's how they get new SJW recruits. But this is worse because we're talking about literal terrorism. And once they've fallen in that far, there's really no coming back. Because it's got that additional element of religion to push it even further. But the first tide of jihadists left in 2007 under the banner of joining al-Shabaab, after neighboring Ethiopia invaded Somalia a year earlier, criticizing its own need to face the direct threat encroaching their borders from within that unstable country. Since then, some 23 men from the Twin Cities allegedly made it to the Horn of Africa, specifically to take up arms with al-Shabaab. At least 2 became suicide bombers, and an estimated 7 more are believed to have died on the battlefield. For over a decade, Islamist terror groups have been able to recruit from Minnesota. This is in part because Minnesota has a large Muslim population compared to other parts of the U.S., said Robin Simcox, a terrorism and national security expert at the Heritage Foundation. However, it is also because there have been small segments of the Somali community there that have struggled to integrate into the U.S. Al-Shabaab and ISIS have exploited this, upon religious, political, cultural, and identity issues, to offer a compelling alternative to Western democracy. Josh Lepowski, senior research analyst at the Counter-Extremism Project, concurred that immigrant community in Minnesota has proven to be ripe for targeting in recent years by specifically playing into the card of being something of an outsider, and that society has shunned them. Local authorities contend it has been challenging for them to penetrate the Somali-American community in Minneapolis, to remain a unique immigrant population that hasn't actively assimilated with the neighboring township. In the neighborhood of Cedar Riverside, for example, it's possible to go about day-to-day business without interacting with a non-Somali. You can buy your clothes at a Somali mall. You can buy insurance at a Somali insurance adjuster. You can buy a real estate at a Somali real estate adjuster. Explained to U.S. official. I think that is pretty unique. Bottom line is, the solution to this is integration. You have to assimilate with the culture you're coming to. That's plain and simple. But the responsibility to assimilate is not purely on the immigrant. It's also part of the responsibility is to the native. You must present yourself, your country, and your culture in a very welcoming, friendly manner. Because it's not on them, it's on you too. Greet the person, be their neighbor, be hospitable. It starts there. Make them second guess everything they've ever been taught about you. But anyway, most of those alleged to have joined Al-Shabaab had completed high school and were either in college or working in an array of industries or maintenance. Security guards and caregivers, others worked at rental or car companies, money wiring service centers, and in fashion retail. One such person, Mohammed Said Omar, reportedly left in 2008 and went on to facilitate the conduit for other Minnesota-based recruits and returned to the U.S. a few months later. He was sentenced in 2013 to 20 years behind bars, but there are other underlying causes, officials said. Janine Brudenell, who formerly served as the Somali liaison for the Minneapolis Police Department, told Fox News much of the extremism that has sparked in recent years perhaps ironically stemmed from the crackdown to dismantle local street gangs. In trying to lead youth away from joining gangs, many parents were taking their children to the mosques, which deal with everything, including mental health concerns. She said that opened the way for radicalization. In one case, Zachariah Maroof was known for some time as a member of the local Somali Hot Boys gang. That sounds really gay. Yet he is reported to have become deeply religious after abandoning the street life, and around 2008 is alleged to have fled abroad. He was killed in Somalia the following year. As for Omar, she spoke up for a group of 6 Somalis arrested in 2015 for trying to cross into Mexico as part of a plan to join ISIS in Syria. As the case went to trial the following year, the then state representative wrote a letter to the trial judge requesting compassion and lighter sentencing on behalf of one of the Minnesota men who is facing 30 years jail time. Such punitive measures not only lack efficacy, they inevitably create an environment in which extremism can flourish, aligning with the presupposition of terrorist recruitment, Omar wrote. The best deterrent to fanaticism is a system of compassion. We must alter our attitude and approach. If we truly want to effect change, we should refocus our efforts on inclusion and rehabilitation. Her position has been slammed by those who say she hasn't taken a tough enough stand. Representative Omar is asking for our justice system to support known terrorists. This sets an extremely poor precedent and should not be allowed, contended Rudolph Atala, Chief Executive Officer of White Mountain Research and former Africa counterterrorism in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. She clearly has a bias and an agenda and does not understand what the United States truly stands for. Omar has also been criticized by others in the community who contend her plea didn't go far enough. A lot of people were disappointed. They felt she could have done more. One Minneapolis local noted, arguing the boys had been coerced into making final arrangements to flee abroad by FBI informants and would never have gone that far without encouragement. Omar's office did not respond to requests for further comment. Meanwhile, authorities have pushed back against the argument to the Somalis arrested crossing into Mexico wouldn't have done so without the FBI involvement. Officials also said they repeatedly met with the families of the suspects, cautioning parents about their children's plan to no avail. We would go out and interview people, try for an intervention, really try to stop those people from going, but they were determined to go. They were committed. We tried to stop and could not. One source said, we had to prosecute prosecute to stop them from going. While Dowd ended up with a 30-year sentence, others charged with similar offenses have since been more fortunate. In November 2016, a Minnesota judge gave 21-year-old Abdullahi Youssef an unprecedented opportunity to avoid jail time by undergoing experimental rehabilitation after having pled guilty in 2014 to purporting to join ISIS. 6 months later, he was back before the judge, having violated the terms of his probation, having been caught watching a news documentary about Western ISIS fighters. In the halfway house where he was confined, nonetheless, Youssef completed the carefully tailored Heartland Democracy Education program centered on studying literature, philosophy, and writing poetry in the late 2017. Was integrated back into society where he will be monitored for the next 20 years. His lawyer, Gene Brandy, told Fox News, Youssef's transformation has been nothing short of successful, and one that could be adapted to others going down a dangerous road to radicalization. It was a program uniquely tailored to Abdullahi, but which can and does work with all teens or young adults who are staying onto unhealthy paths. It allowed Abdullahi to see his role as a member of his society rather than as an outsider. Brandy continued, underscoring that it can be used to make any young person feel integrated, rather than at war with his or her personal universe. Authorities told Fox News that Youssef was indeed a rare and unique case, and that he had gone from being the ringleader planning the move abroad to largely walking away from it prior to arrests being made. Going forward, authorities say they are adjusting their approach to deal with ever-changing threat climate. Our focus now is on homegrown violent extremists, and the Somali population is a factor in that, out of the federal official, highlighting a 2016 incident in which a Somali American embarked on a mass stabbing spree at the St. Cloud Mall in Minnesota, before being fatally shot by an off-duty police officer. That is a more likely scenario at this point than a large class of kids trying to get to a foreign terrorist organization in the theater of war. In short, the true solution is integration, rehabilitation, or just make them stay home. If you're not coming here to be American, then stay home. I hate to say it, but that's the truth. And if they're a refugee, then establish a camp either somewhere within the country or outside of it, maybe in a U.S. territory. We certainly got lots of those. Put up a camp in Puerto Rico. Establish a camp there or something. If they're not gonna assimilate and become American, well, there you go. But part of that assimilation has to be on the part of the native population. We have to be welcoming. We have to be friendly. We have to be good neighbors. And that would be my final statement on that. Juicy Smollett, or Jesse Smollett, I'm not sure how to spell with a U, faked his attack and paid 2 Nigerian actors $3,500 to attack him. One of the men brought the rope used in the incident at Smollett's request. CBSLocal.com reports the sources also say the Empire actor paid for the rope, which was purchased at the Crafty Beaver hardware store in the Ravenswood neighborhood the weekend of January 25th. The brothers, who were questioned by police this week before being released, were paid $3,500 before leaving for Nigeria and were promised an additional $500 upon their return. They left for Nigeria later in the day on January 29th after the attack. Sources said one of the brothers held the rope and poured bleach while the other wore a plain red hat and yelled slurs at Smollett. The sources say the red hat was bought at an uptown beauty supply store and that the attack was supposed to happen before January 29th. The brothers told detectives the 3 men rehearsed the attack days prior to it happening. Smollett claims 2 men attacked him in Streeterville early January 29th as he was heading to his apartment. He said they yelled racial and homophobic slurs at him, poured a chemical on him, and put a rope around his neck. Really, though, I think that Josie Smollett, or Jesse, Juicy, or really anyone else looking to slander Trump supporters or MAGA hat wearers should see jail time, maybe even prison, for what is obviously perjury and defamation. The 2 Nigerian brothers are now cooperating with the police, hopefully to get Jussie Smollett arrested for defamation and perjury, as he should be. He should be formally charged, given a fair trial, and passed down a sentence. Since being released Friday night, the brothers have been staying in an undisclosed location. Chicago police spokesperson Anthony Guglielmi, I don't know, but he said, "We can confirm that the information received from the individuals questioned by police early in the Empire case has in fact shifted the trajectory of the investigation. We've reached out to the Empire cast member's attorney to request a follow-up interview." Police raided the brothers' home on Wednesday, the same day police met them at O'Hare International Airport. As they were returning from Nigeria, the 2 were in custody at Area Central Detective Headquarters since Wednesday night, before they were released on Friday evening. Police at one point had placed them under arrest and referred to them as suspects in the case. Then after interviews on Friday, they were released. Pictures from the raid showed the front door busted off its frame, items thrown across the living room, bedroom doors damaged, and clothes tossed everywhere. Police left behind an inventory list. Some of the items seized included blackface mask, hat, an Empire script, phone receipts, a red hat, and bleach. CBS 2's Brad Edwards reported Thursday that a source with intimate knowledge of the investigation said investigators believe Jussie Smollett potentially staged the attack. Smollett's attorneys, Todd S. Pugh and Victor P. Henderson, released a statement Saturday about the latest allegations. As a victim of a hate crime who has cooperated with the police investigation, Jussie Smollett is angered and devastated by recent reports that the perpetrators are individuals he is familiar with. He has now been further victimized by claims attributed to these alleged perpetrators that Jussie played a role in his own attack. Nothing is further from the truth, and anyone claiming otherwise is lying. One of these purported suspects was Jussie's personal trainer, who he hired to ready him physically for a music video. It is impossible to believe that this person could have played a role in the crime against Jussie, or would falsely claim Jussie's complicity. It's obvious to me what happened here. He planned this whole thing because he's an anti-Trumper. He's a never-Trumper. And he knows that the mainstream media will, how they report on a story bit by bit, one bit at a time until they have more details. Like I do. However, the difference between me and them is they always immediately jump to a conclusion. They go straight to a conclusion, like it's already said and done. And he knows this. That's why he knew they would frame the story in a way that would make Trump supporters look bad. And that was his goal. And that is why he should suffer some sort of consequence for this. And I mean big. He should either be doing jail or prison. Whatever. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a judge. But whatever sentence is appropriate, just let him have it. Throw the book at him. Plain and simple. Alright, everybody. So Anthony Weiner put his wiener in some kids, and now he has to register as a sex offender. That's what you get, dude. Stupid pedophile, man. The former congressman and husband to Hillary Clinton's top aide, Huma Abedin, is now part of a federal re-entry program in New York. Presumably, he will be free to prey on young girls again. NYPost.com reports Weiner has been transferred from Federal Medical Center in Devens, Massachusetts, where he served a bulk of his 21-month sentence for sexting a 15-year-old girl from North Carolina, according to the Federal Bureau of Prisons records. Oh boy. This is something that is so easy to get caught on that anyone who's willing to do this should just be declared an idiot. Because it's so easy to get caught. The 54-year-old is now being supervised by the Federal Residential Reentry Management, which has a field office in Sunset Park and operates multiple facilities. The records say the 54-year-old is now being supervised by the Pardon. The records say he is either in a halfway house or in home confinement. TMZ reported it's not clear when the transfer took place. Weiner is set to be released from federal custody on May 14th, thanks to good conduct behind bars that shaved about 3 months off his sentence. He'll spend 3 years on supervised release and will have to pay a $10,000 fine, as well as register as a sex offender. The once rising Democrat flamed out amid a series of sexting scandals. It first began in 2011. When he resigned from Congress after admitting to sending an X-rated photo and engaging in inappropriate relationships with women online, 2 years later his comeback bid to become New York's mayor was torpedoed by revelations he sexted with another woman under the pseudonym Carlos Danger. The Pole's lewd behavior took a more disturbing turn, however, when he was busted in 2017 for sexting with a high school girl. Whoops! Despite knowing she was underage, Weiner wept at his sentencing, calling himself a very sick man. I agree. Huma Abedin, his wife and mother of their young son, filed for divorce just hours after he pleaded guilty, but she later withdrew the case to settle matters out of court. You get what you deserve, Weiner, especially since you had those emails on your laptop relevant to the Hillary case. This is just the kind of thing that makes you want to believe in karma. So, Kamala Harris protected pedo priests in the American Catholic Church. Yes, there is an American Catholic Church, and yes, they do answer to the Pope. They are technically an arm of the Vatican. According to an investigation by SF Weekly, Harris repeatedly protected files containing details of how the church dealt with pedophile priests, preventing journalists from viewing them. SFWeekly.com reports SF Weekly attempts to obtain her office's files on Catholic clergy abuse under the State Public Records Act. Suggest Harris favors concealment over transparency. The records at issue may contain answers to a question of great public concern that has consumed international headlines during recent weeks. What did senior Catholic officials know, and what did they do behind the scenes while priests accused of molesting children were shielded from punishment? Cardinal William Lovato was Archbishop of San Francisco until 2005. He now works and lives in the Vatican. He is directly responsible for and is key to the Church's policy of punishing whistleblowers and protecting pedo priests. In short, this man is an enabler of moral degeneracy. Sick. Portions of this record came to light in stories by then SF Weekly staff writer Ron Russell. In 2005, and in May 5th story in the New York Times that recounted elements of Russell's reporting by sifting through documents made public as a result of lawsuits, Russell learned that during the 1990s and 2000s, Lovato helped keep allegations against pedophile priests shrouded in secrecy. Alleged abusers included Salesian brother Salvatore Biglianti, who police allege had sexual relations with at least 24 children. But charges were dropped after the California Supreme Court overturned a state law extending the statute of limitations for pedophiles. And so the full contents of Archdiocese clergy abuse files obtained by prosecutors were never revealed at trial. Relatively unscathed by his San Francisco legacy, now Cardinal Lovato is the chief Vatican official charged with responding to global allegations of clergy abuse. Horrible position to put him in. That's not going to end well. Given Lovato's current role overseeing pedophile priests and cover-up cases across the globe, said David Clohesi, National Director of the Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests, or SNAP, it is more important than ever that parents and citizens Catholics learn exactly what he did in San Francisco. Oh, snap. District Attorney Kamala Harris possesses San Francisco Archdiocese files containing details of how the church dealt with pedophile priests that go back as far as 80 years. But Harris, the front-runner in the June primary elections to become the Democratic candidate for California Attorney General, has for 5 years rebuffed reporters' efforts to view those files, despite statements by former DA Terrence Hallinan saying they should be released. For the past 6 weeks, SF Weekly has asked Harris' office to comply with the request under the California Public Records Act. It has released nothing. A prosecutor must be careful not to release records that might undermine an investigation, unfairly malign the innocent, or expose victims to publicity they don't want. But in this case, Harris' office seems to be going beyond these important principles to a blanket policy of secrecy. It's worth recalling that Harris was recently lambasted by a judge for hiding the extent of an evidence handling scandal at the San Francisco Police Department crime lab, and for ignoring her constitutional obligation to turn over to defense attorneys the criminal histories of police testifying at a trial. Did Harris merely misinterpret the law, or does she have a penchant for secrecy? On April 21st, just as controversy was heating up over the Vatican's role in the global sex abuse scandal, Harris Deputy Paul Henderson responded to my request by stating that Harris' investigative files were not subject to California's government transparency laws. Her office essentially enjoys a blanket secrecy privilege. I sent Henderson's argument to California Newspaper Publishers Association legal counsel Jim Ewert. That's flatly untrue, he said. The district attorney's office can release them if they want to, but they have decided not to. The I was not me. I read articles and I report what's in the articles. That's what I do. So you're probably wondering, like, why watch me when I could just read the articles? Well, because I have a cool opinion to offer. I have an extra outside analysis. I add things in sometimes that can put things in perspective. I wrote to Harris' office citing Ewert's analysis. Oh, wait, hold on. I wrote to Harris' office citing Ewert's analysis, not me. Again, it's the article. Harris' spokeswoman, Erica Derrick, changed course, saying they would retrieve and review the files to determine whether there were any I could view. Again, following half a dozen phone conversations and many email exchanges, Derrick said she would contact me on May 24th, but I didn't hear from her when I emailed and called her again. Almost 7 weeks after my initial request, she said she was still working on it. I have heard nothing more again. In lieu of releasing records, Harris' office ended up releasing a statement. District Attorney Harris focuses her efforts on putting child molesters in prison. We're not interested in selling out our victims to look good in the paper. In this case, brought under Terrence Hallinan, prosecutors took the utmost care to protect the identity and dignity of the victims. That was the right thing to do. Then it's the right thing to do now. This sort of statement drives abuse victims crazy. Joel Castier, Western Regional Director of SNAP, was sexually abused as a child by a lay teacher at a Catholic school. She had to sue to obtain records pertaining to the incident. She rejects Harris' rationale for keeping Archdiocese's abuse records secret. It's possible, even routine, to release records about pedophile priests while protecting the names of victims, Castier explained. That's one of the most dangerous statements I've ever heard, she said. The number one thing that gets predators off the street is transparency about predators. You can do that by releasing documents, and you can redact victims' names at the same time. Joey Piscitelli, SNAP's Northwest Regional Director, was more adamant in denouncing Harris' logic. They're full of shit. You can quote me on that, he said. Fine, I did. They're not protecting the victims, they're protecting Levada. Hallinan, who forced the Archdiocese to turn over the records in 2002, and who pursued cases against priests before his office was barred from proceeding by expired statutes of limitations, sees no reason to keep the files secret. Obviously, those things should be made public, he said in an interview. Rick Simons, who has represented victims in clergy abuse cases, said Harris is notorious for refusing to respond to public records requests. He added that her office has refused to release records, even of investigations into priests who had already been tried, convicted, jailed, and released. Other district attorneys, such as Alameda County's Nanci O'Malley, have been far more forthcoming, particularly when it comes to exposing clergy who abuse children. Simon said that Harris' penchant for secrecy shows a pattern and practice and policy of ignoring the rights of children but one of the largest institutions of the city and county of San Francisco and in the Bay Area. Cam Kawada, campaign consultant to Los Angeles District Attorney Rocky Delgadillo, who faces Harris in the Democratic primary, said his boss also regards the matter differently. "We see no reason why transparency and protecting the victim cannot work hand in hand," he said. This isn't the first time Harris was employed troubling logic to argue for keeping the Archdiocese abuse files secret. In 2005, Russell also asked for the records. A Harris spokesman responded at the time by saying, "If we did it for you, we would have to do it for everybody. Where do you stop and where do you start?" California law is clear when you start with the presumption that the people's business is public. On March 27th, Levada published an unusual 2,500-word essay on the Holy See's website denouncing the New York Times for publishing clergy abuse stories. He claimed did not sufficiently highlight the church's purported zeal in rooting out predatory priests. In 2002, this is a quote, I was appointed at the time as Archbishop of San Francisco to a team of the bishops to seek approval of the Holy See for the essential norms that American bishops developed to allow U.S. to deal with abuse questions, Levada wrote. We founded Cardinal Ratzinger, the future Pope Benedict XVI, and the experts he assigned to meet with us a sympathetic understanding of the problems we forced as American bishops. To people who have closely followed Levada's career, it seemed bizarre that he would mention his 2002 role in devising national Catholic clergy abuse policies. For help in this task, Levada enlisted his longtime ally, San Mateo cleric Father Gregory Ingalls. According to Russell's SF Weekly investigation in 1996, Levada learned Ingalls had been accused of sodomizing a 15-year-old boy. Ooh. Yet Levada helped Ingalls' career flourish and supported Ingalls' role as a top church policymaker even after learning of a second serious allegation of sexual abuse. In Marin County, prosecutors assembled a sex abuse case against Ingalls using information drawn from the Archdiocese's files, but Ingalls' case was thrown out because the statute of limitations had expired. Ultimately, the church agreed to settle one of the complaints by paying an alleged victim $2.7 million and in the process sealing records similar to the ones Harris controls. Nobody paid Harris to conceal the church's child abuse history, however, rather she simply seems to view secrecy as a path of least resistance, whether or not it's consistent with the public interest. In short, Kamala Harris is a lying criminal who slept with people to get her career ahead. And this is the biggest lie she's ever told. This is a problem. If this is who the Democrats are pushing, then just don't vote Democrat. Plain and simple. Just don't. They're pretty much all criminals at this point. That's just my opinion. You can do what you want, but I'm saying just please don't. Beto O'Rourke promises to tear down any and all barriers and walls on the southern border. Don't be surprised if you lose votes, Mr. O'Rourke. You certainly don't get mine. Excuse me. The failed Texas Senate candidate told MSNBC on Thursday that he is prepared to physically tear down walls and fencing already in place on the U.S.-Mexican border. Yes, absolutely. I'd take the wall down, O'Rourke told MSNBC host Chris Hayes. On All In during an interview near the border on Thursday, O'Rourke has represented El Paso in Congress for 3 terms, and that he believes city residents would pass a referendum to remove the wall if it were put up for a vote. Information Liberation reports. He went on to say 4,000 migrants died trying to illegally invade the country because the walls made it so hard for them to stroll right in. Remember though, folks, as the New York Times assured us, Democrats do not want open borders. Yeah, they do. They want open borders so migrants can come walking right on in and vote for them. That's how it works. And Beto O'Rourke is the brute force portion of the Democratic Party. He's not as subtle as many others. New evidence obtained by Judicial Watch makes it clear that Obama's FBI was protecting Hillary Clinton from criminal consequences. According to new emails, the FBI created a chart detailing all of Clinton's possible criminal offenses. ZeroHedge.com reports the newly obtained emails come in response to a court-ordered Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA, request that the DOJ had previously ignored via Judicial Watch emphasis hours. 3 days after then, FBI Director James Comey's press conference announcing that he would not recommend a prosecution of Mrs. Clinton. On July 8, 2016, email chain shows that the Social Counsel to the FBI's Executive Assistant Director in charge of the National Security Branch, whose name is redacted, wrote to Strzok and others that he was producing a chart of the statutory violations considered during the investigation of Clinton's server and the reasons for the recommendation not to prosecute. The following is a conversation that you should take into consideration. One name is redacted, and the other is Strzok's, I think. Redacted writes, I am still working on an additional page for these TPs that consist of a chart of the statutory violations considered during the investigation and the reasons for the recommendation not to prosecute, hopefully in non-lawyer friendly terms. Strzok forwards to Page, Jonathan Moffa, and others. I have redlined some points. Broadly, I have some concerns about asking some of our senior field folks to get into the business of briefing this case, particularly when we have the D's, Comey's statement, as a kind of standalone document, in my opinion. There's too much nuance, detail, and potential for missteps, but I get they may likely be asked for comment. Redacted writes to Strzok, Page, and others, the DD Andrew McCabe will need to approve these before they are pushed out to anyone. At the end of last week, he wasn't inclined to send them to anyone, but it's great to have them on the shelf in case they're needed. Redacted writes to Strzok and Page, I'm really not sure why they continue working on these talking points in the morning. I'll make sure Andy McCabe tells Mike Corton to keep those in his pocket. I guess Andy just didn't ever have a moment to turn these off with Mike like he said he would. Page replies, yes, agree that this is not a good idea. Neither these talking points nor the chart of potential violations committed by Clinton and her associates have been released. On May 15, 2016, James Rybicki, former Chief of Staff to Comey, sends FBI General Counsel James Baker, Bill Priestop, former Assistant Director of the FBI's Counterintelligence Division, McCabe, Page, and others, an email with the subject line, requested from the Director. Rybicki writes by NLT no later than, next Monday the Director would like to see a list of all cases charged in the last 20 years where the gravamen of the charge was mishandling classified information. It should be in the chart form with 1. Case name, 2. A short summary of the content, 3. Charge brought, and 4. Charge of conviction. If need be, we can get it from NSD or National Security Division. Let them know that the Director asked for this personally. Please let me know who can take the lead on this. Thanks, Jim. Page forwards to Strzok, FYSA for your situational awareness. Strzok replies to Page, I'll take the lead, of course. Sounds like an espionage section question. Or do you think OGC, Office of the General Counsel, should, and the more reason for us to get the feedback to Rybicki, as well as identified this as an issue question over a week ago? Page replies, I was going to reply to him, Rybicki, and tells him I can. Talked to you about this already. Do you want me to? Recall that the FBI agents involved made extensive edits to former Director James Comey's statement exonerating Hillary Clinton, changing the language to effectively downgrade the crime of mishandling classified information so they could recommend no charges. According to a December 2017 letter from Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee Chairman Rob Johnson to FBI Director Christopher Wray, fired FBI agent Peter Strzok, changed the language regarding Clinton's conduct in the criminal charge of gross negligence to extremely careless. Gross negligence is a legal term of art and criminal law, often associated with recklessness. According to Black's Law Dictionary, gross negligence is a severe degree of negligence taken as reckless disregard and blatant indifference to one's legal duty, others' safety of their rights. Extremely careless, on the other hand, is not a legal term of art. According to an attorney briefed on the matter, extremely careless is in fact a defense to gross negligence. What my client did was careless, maybe even extremely careless, but it was not gross negligence, Your Honor. The FBI would have no option but to recommend prosecution of the phrase gross negligence that had been left in. 18 U.S. Code 98793, gathering, transmitting, or losing difference information, specifically uses the phrase gross negligence. Had Comey used the phrase, he would have essentially declared that Hillary had broken the law. And now, thanks to the Judicial Watch, FOIA, we know that the FBI also went to great lengths to justify letting Clinton off the hook with a chart of her offenses. I think I figured out what this whole deep state thing is about. This is liberal America now, and liberalism as a political ideology has been running this country into the ground. Truth be known, it has been running it into the ground. And I think this whole deep state, which is largely comprised of the administration of former President Barack Obama, I think the whole purpose of it is to screw Republicans when they get a president in, and try to keep power in a country that is beginning to hate them. I think that's what it is. That's just my opinion. But anyway. Lindsey Graham promises to lead an investigation into claims of a deep state. Don't forget to look into former president's administration as well as the FBI and DOJ. Senator Graham said he is prepared to subpoena former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe after he admitted on national television to committing treason. We're going to find out what happened here, and the only way I know to find out is to call the people in under oath and find out, through questioning, who's telling the truth, because the underlying accusation is beyond stunning. Graham told CBS Face the Nation. Fox News reports Graham added that he also plans to subpoena both McCabe and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. If they won't voluntarily agree to testify about the committee, there is no organization beyond scrutiny. Graham said there is no organization that can withstand scrutiny, and the FBI will come out stronger. He said, but we've got to get to the bottom of it. What are people to think after they watch 60 Minutes when they hear this accusation by the acting FBI director that the Deputy Attorney General encouraged him to try to find ways to count votes to replace the president? That can't go unaddressed. Graham's comments come on the heels of a Fox News story that reported that former FBI lawyer James Baker in closed-doors testimony to Congress detailed alleged discussions among senior officials at the Justice Department about invoking the 25th Amendment. The testimony was delivered last fall to the House Oversight and Judiciary Committees. Fox News has confirmed portions of the transcript. It provides additional insight into discussions that have returned to the spotlight in Washington, as fired FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe revisits the matter during interviews promoting his forthcoming book. According to Baker's lawyer, Andrew McCabe and Lisa Page had some fairly sinister discussions featuring the 25th Amendment, which allows a president to be removed in the event of death, incapacitation, or otherwise deemed unable to fill his presidential duties. In other words, they're basically looking at anything and everything to get rid of Trump. Baker has released a statement. I was being told by some combination of Andy McCabe and Lisa Page that in a conversation with the Deputy Attorney General, he had stated that this was what was related to me. This is a quote, by the way. That he had at least 2 members of the President's cabinet who were ready to support, I guess you would call it, an action under the 25th Amendment, Baker told the committee. Graham's comments on Sunday came after he floated the idea of a subpoena last week in a comment to Fox News about the Justice Department discussions. I would like to know what happened, Graham told Fox News. You're having a conversation about whether or not you're going to invoke the 25th Amendment. I imagine if the shoe were on the other foot, my Democratic colleagues would want to know about the conversation that involved the Democrats. CBS News reported on McCabe's comments after he told 60 Minutes that Justice Department officials discussed the possibility of removing Trump via the 25th Amendment, and that Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein had offered to wear a wire around the president. The 25th Amendment provides a mechanism for removing a sitting president from office. One way that could happen is if a majority of the president's cabinet says the president is incapable of discharging his duties, as I said before. Since giving the interview to 60 Minutes, McCabe has since made an about-face with the spokesperson for the former FBI chief releasing a statement that says McCabe did not participate in extended discussions about the use of the 25th Amendment, nor is he aware of any such discussions. The Justice Department issued a statement calling McCabe's comments inaccurate and factually incorrect. Reports of the discussions of invoking the 25th Amendment and of Rosenstein wearing a wire were reported in the New York Times. Yeah, it's just a scheme by the Democrats. The deep state is purely Democratic, and maybe even some establishment Republicans, to challenge Republicans from taking back America, after liberalism as an ideology has again been running this country into the ground, and allowing perversion after perversion. FYI, I'm actually bisexual, so I'm not against the LGBT community since I'm literally a part of you, Although so much of what you do is perverted, and I want nothing to do with you. But nonetheless, the Democrats and indeed liberalism has essentially turned this country into a quagmire of uncivility, argumentative politics, and just general defamation, harassing, doxing. We're basically acting like a bunch of animals in politics. Conservatism didn't cause it. It's not much of a solution, though. According to a statement by the Guatemalan head of intelligence, Mario Duarte, the migrants heading toward the U.S. is a planned invasion. I'm going to give a quick talk here about globalism and my opinion on this issue. See, globalism is an ideology that was dreamed up, a whole new school of politics that was dreamed up by a German by the name of Nicholas Kalergi. He was witness to many of the actions taken by the Nazis in World War II and felt deep guilt. They traced pay stubs back to his bank account. He actually paid someone to try and assassinate Adolf Hitler. And after World War II, he dreamt up globalism and therefore blamed nationalism for both world wars. Now, while I could be wrong about that history, it is nonetheless true that it was his creation, and a globalist ideal has been pushed in the media in such things as Star Trek and the ending to the anime Netflix, the Netflix anime Voltron Legendary Defender. Globalism and just general mixing and commingling, which really, when you actually examine the science of that, it doesn't work. The differences between us, our cultural issues, unless we all became of one culture, it just wouldn't work. I'm so sorry. It's a wonderful idea on paper, but it just can't work. And it's ruining countries, it's ruining people, it's ruining lives. It's worse than socialism. Which is why this show is called The Unglobalist. I am strictly against it. And my position on this specific issue is I believe that individuals similar to or in the same boat as George Soros are the ones who've been putting together these little caravans and sending them up here to try and globalize America, bit by bit. Now, the quote is, "This was not a spontaneous event. It was well planned. It was well organized," Duarte said at an event hosted by the Center for Free Security Society at the National Press Club. Breitbart.com reports, he said different intelligence, law enforcement, and military agencies found evidence that the October caravan from Honduras to the U.S., which at one point contained about 40,000 migrants, was organized in advance. There was a call on October 5th in Honduras for citizens to join a massive migration walk to the United States. He said, "We detected logistical preparation throughout Guatemala and Mexico to be able to bring all these people to the United States southern border." He said that the main organization behind the caravan was a non-governmental organization based out of Chicago called Pueblos Sin Fronteras, led by organizer and pastor Emma Lozano. They started working with Honduran, Guatemalan, and Mexico counterparts, he said. The organization was impressive, to say the least. They used mainly social media apps, WhatsApp and Facebook. Moved through Guatemala. He said Bartolo Fuentes, and a Honduran activist, was the main leader of the caravan on the ground, and that he came into Guatemala beforehand to scout and send money to places migrants could stay as they moved through Guatemala towards Mexico. Duarte said the group also connected with international NGOs like Oxfam. He also gave details on the tactics the caravan used as pushed into Guatemala. "We had a big, huge contingent of police officers protecting our border. Unfortunately, this migrant group put women, the elderly, and children as young as 40 days of age at the front and started pushing and pressing against our police force," he said. According to Duarte, at least 100 migrants were actually from the Middle East. Some of Trump's fears have therefore been given a validity. We also intercepted a total of 126 special interest aliens during these caravans. Special interest aliens from countries and with probable links to Islamic extremists, Duarte said. Duarte warned that another big group of migrants coming from different countries in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, and from Cuba is headed to the United States. Their intent is to make a 30,000-strong caravan to go all the way up through Central America, Mexico, and come to the U.S. open border. He said Duarte assessed that the migrants traveling in the caravans were being used as pawns, as a way to destabilize the United States and partners in the region. This new way of doing politics, which is how we are actually analyzing this, we are calling it, and we're using this term, and it's now weaponization of those in need, he said. He did not blame the migrants. He said we're in search of economic opportunities or trying to escape conflict, persecution, terrorism, human rights violations, and other things. As human beings and societies, we cannot ignore difficulties others face in life, he said. Unfortunately, cruel, heartless, manipulative political actors and radicals have taken advantage of these need and are utilizing them now as lethal weapons of invasion, of political influence, and as their own private parties of picketing mobs. That's what this is, he said. Let's not lose our real capacity of analysis. The migrant caravans are not spontaneous. They are being politically orchestrated and well-funded with a specific political objective. I agree. Done with U.S. news. This is going to be the longest episode I've ever released, but this shit's important. European news. Joe Biden traveled to Germany to tell globalists that America is an embarrassment to the world. The probable presidential candidate made the comments at the Munich Security Conference over the weekend. Via the Washington Examiner, speaking on German soil 75 years after the U.S. and its allies prepared for D-Day, Joe Biden described America as an embarrassment, and its trade policy self-defeating. The America I see values basic human decency, not snatching children from their parents, or turning our back on refugees at our border. Americans know that's not right. The former vice president and presidential 2020 Democratic presidential candidate told the Munich Security Conference, "The American people understand plainly that this makes us an embarrassment. The American people know overwhelmingly that it is not right, that it is not who we are." A 75-year-old man partaking in typical Democratic emotional grandstanding. I'm sorry, but we can't support that many refugees so long as we are spending so much money and let me tell you something, how much money we're spending and why we cannot support these people until the spending gets cut. In fiscal year 2018, we spent $639 billion on the military budget. About about $1,091 billion, including $64.2 billion for Medicaid and $449 billion in other welfare, and $1 trillion on infrastructure in fiscal year 2017. Bottom line, it's not about heart versus heartlessness. It's about what is and is not possible. Oh yeah, and we're also $21 trillion in debt as current. Yeah, so we can totally afford to take in all these migrants. I mean, totally, dude. Yeah. You know, we got that money. We can just keep spending and print more bills. Like, yeah. It's not like this is going to put us any further in the hole. Speaking at the annual gathering of foreign policy leaders, didn't mention Trump by name. But despite a long-standing tradition of politics stopping at the water's edge and refraining from criticizing Commander-in-Chief on foreign soil, Biden took the opportunity to blast him, even veering into criticism of domestic policy as he launched into what sounded like a stump speech. Biden's jabs drew applause from European critics of Trump hours after Vice President Mike Pence had spoken at the conference, lauding the president's efforts to press NATO allies into increased defense spending in the face of Russian aggression. Ironically, Biden lambasted Trump at the high-profile conference for making his grievances with allies public. "You're never allowed to disagree with your brothers and sisters in public," he said. "Today, because of, I think, a lack of leadership coming from the other side of the Atlantic, we find ourselves in a different place, and it's uncomfortable." Biden allotted the limbering up for a bid for the 2020 Democratic nomination, which would be his third tilt at White House. After sputtering attempts in 1988 and 2008, I spent better part of the last 2 years traveling throughout the United States of America, from Minnesota to Texas, from Boston to Birmingham, I said. I can assure you that the American people, the ultimate wellspring of power in the United States of America, remain committed to engaging the world with decency and respect. Biden also strongly defended the money pit that is the Cold War relic NATO, which is like himself a dinosaur that continues to bray from the tar pit of history. The truth is, Biden will not get the nomination for presidential candidate. The more radical libs will reject him for being one of the straight white males I've heard so much about. Oh, so evil! You're oppressing me purely by the fact that you're straight white male. Yeah, he's not going to get the nomination. No fucking way. Guarantee, you see that 2020 ballot, you will find his name nowhere on it. Poland says no to Merkel and Macron's EU army proposal. Poland's foreign minister has rejected Angela Merkel's idea of creating an EU army, saying Europe needs an American presence to protect the continent. Combining the military forces of the EU's 28 member state has long been a dream for some of the EU's globalist leaders, most notably French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Angela Merkel. RT.com reports, however, the EU is more divided than the cozy relationship between Macron and Merkel suggests. Macron's vision was rubbished by neutral Austria's defense minister and by Dutch PM Mark Rutte. Now, the Polish government has also rejected the idea. When we start talking about creating a European army independent of NATO, I think we will have problems, said Polish Foreign Minister Jacek Putowicz, for repelling the threats we face in Central and Eastern Europe. We need an American presence, and this is very important. Brexit plays a factor in Kapuzowicz's rejection. The UK is the world's 6th largest military power and will be a crucial member of any hypothetical EU army if Britain were to remain an EU member and sign on to the plan. We will lose a very important part in the EU, a second major army in Europe, a country, a nuclear power, and a permanent member of the UN Security Council when Britain leaves, Kapukowicz said. Added. CZAPUTOWICZ, I can't pronounce it. Polish President Andrzej Duda is looking for $2 billion to build Fort Trump to create a permanent U.S. presence, stating that we need protection handled by the U.S., not the EU. Is Fort Trump where they're going to launch their Trump card attack? Poland also linked a $414 million deal on Wednesday to purchase the M142 HIMARS weapon system. The HIMARS system can launch rockets and tactical ballistic missiles and has an operation range of 480 kilometers. The deal was accompanied by a Pentagon statement that Poland and the U.S. are continuing discussions regarding further U.S. deployments on Polish soil. The planned base raised the alarm in Moscow. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov called the Polish proposal a sovereign decision, but warned that the consequences of the general atmosphere in Europe would be obvious. Meanwhile, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said on Friday that the EU cannot take the role of NATO in providing security. It is impossible, adding that efforts of the EU and NATO complement each other and do not compete. Merkel, Stoltenberg, U.S. Vice President Mike Pence, and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, as well as Kapukowicz, Zapudowicz, were attending a Munich security conference which brings 500 policymakers to discuss foreign policy. So yeah, it raises Russia's ire, but you know, they do need U.S. protection from the EU. Because the EU is getting more and more despotic by the day, especially in Britain. So don't be surprised to see EU troops trying to march their way into Poland as an invading force. Do not be surprised. Because they're going to do that to everyone who doesn't side with them, for sure. Whew. Finally, to our 2 last stories today. 2 more to go. A producer at the BBC is admitting that the chemical attack in a Syrian hospital was staged. Riyam Daladi, a reputable BBC producer who covers the Middle East, said footage of children allegedly suffering from chemicals in a hospital in Syria's Douma were set up and that nobody died. RT reports he believes Assad forces did attack the town, that the much-publicized hospital scenes were staged. Anticipating further queries, he said no one from the White Helmets or opposition sources were present in Douma by the time the alleged attack had happened, except for one person who was in Damascus. Dilotti also says that an attack did happen, but that sarin, a weapons-grade nerve agent, was not used. He said we'll have to wait for the OPCW, or Organization of the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, to prove chlorine or otherwise. The journalist said Jaish al-Islam, an Islamist faction that fought the Syrian army there, ruled Douma with an iron fist. They co-opted activists, doctors, and humanitarians with fear and intimidation. Dilotti's revelations could have become a bombshell news report, but instead it was met with a deafening media silence. His employer preferred to distance itself from his findings. The BBC told Sputnik in a statement that Dilotti was expressing his personal opinions about some of the video footage that emerged after the attack, but has not claimed that the attack did not happen. After a while, Dilotti restricted access to his Twitter account, which is now only to confirmed followers. Gee, I wonder why. That's a classic move to keep things out of the public eye, you know. To delete Twitter, Twitter accounts or hide them in some way. That's when you know they made a mistake and they figured out their mistake and now they're hiding it. But now the Foreign Ministry has suggested Dilotti is being silenced for voicing inconvenient views. The spokeswoman Maria Zakharova asking on Facebook a telling story. How about Western advocates of rights and freedoms? Had they accused BBC of censorship and pressuring the journalist? These attacks were staged in order to generate more anti-Syrian governmental sentiments and motivate America to attack Syria. Russia asked for OPGW inquiry last year. The Defense Ministry presented what it said was the proof the provocation was to trigger Western airstrikes against Syrian government forces. And finally, our last story. Prince Philip will not be charged for his recent driving accident. Which, if you're not familiar, a quick history. The guy was pulling out of his driveway and the royal car was struck by another driver that he wasn't looking out for. And someone in the back was injured, and he himself was not injured, thankfully. They came out with minimal injuries, but the cars were pretty thoroughly wrecked. The Duke of Edinburgh was unhurt following the collision on January 17th when he pulled out onto a main road and collided with an oncoming car near the Royals' Sandringham residence. Sandringham residence in eastern England. Just 2 days after the crash, the Duke received a warning from police for driving without a seatbelt. Earlier this month, he voluntarily gave up his driving license. Good, because with a mistake like this, you might want to consider senility. Press TV reports the Crown Prosecution Service, or CPS, said in a Thursday statement that Philip, the 97-year-old husband of Queen Elizabeth II, will not be tried in a court over the car crash last month that led to injuries for a 28-year-old woman driver and a 45-year-old woman passenger. The crash, which took place near the Royal Sandringham residence in eastern England on January 17th, caused widespread controversy in Britain, especially after Philip defied public calls for giving up driving and appeared behind the wheel of a new car 2 days after the crash. He then received a warning from the police for not fastening a seatbelt during the new driving session. Yeah, consider senility, because I think he's old enough that he could be senile. Reports after the crash had suggested that Philip had no intention of giving up driving at 97. Despite huge public outrage that the reckless act had caused other accidents, these reports also indicated that the Queen wasn't happy about the media attention to the case and was urging Philip to stop driving. Listen to your wife, Philip. The UK judiciary, however, said that prosecution of Philip, who finally gave up his driving license earlier this month, would not be in the public interest. Stubborn old man. Jalabin, why the member of the royal family should be exempt from legal proceedings. This is a quote. We have decided that it would not be in the public interest to prosecute, said the CPS, adding, we took into account all the circumstances in this case, including the level of culpability and the age of the driver and the surrender of the driving license. Whew. Finally! Longest episode I've ever produced, but it was all terribly important. Anyway, have yourselves a good day.